chain, a lot of fruit and vegetables is exported from Morocco to UK. And what we've been able to do is to make sure that the technology that does that is British. So that's a sort of example of a win-win. So, and I think also, obviously you saw examples of some of the work that FCDO do, and that's all and I think what we're trying to do often now is to link with the amalgamation of the previous Foreign and Commonwealth Office and Department of International Development into one organisation. We're going to see more connectivity between trade policy and aid policy, and I think we're going to see more aid programs that will be targeted specifically at African businesses. There's already quite a few of these. For example, Invest Africa, I can mention, which is a facility available for anyone who's invested in manufacturing in Africa to look at feasibility studies, export routes, etc., etc.
That fair trade, a continued partnership with fair trade, can be a brand enhancing thing that they want to bring into a more visible public arena. But what all of our partners are saying to us very strongly is we need you to continue to be the gold standard, the high bar ethical partner that we need, not just as a brand, but right through the supply chain. So that's a message that we're hearing very strongly, and are behind how we're seeking to evolve and change what we do.
That's where we are really trying also to work with IDH on a roadmap for not only identifying the every actor in the chain with a free location identifier, with a private public passport, but also do training on fair trade auditors and so FlowCert auditors and UTZ and Rainforest Alliance to train them up to help them to how can you calculate a living wage gap if you identified the different locations in your supply chain. And if you as a retailer really want to help, okay, let's find solutions there on how to do it and help auditors, inspectors and NGOs on the ground on how they have to calculate a living wage gap so that the retailer can help to close the gap.
It's the fact is that a ruthless competitor who has got this vast market share can just squeeze you out the market just like that. Now, what also kind of becomes a problem for something like that is the constant need for capital to be able to kind of, say we need $2 or $3 million a year to bring in enough to give us economies of scale to make sure that then we can push the money back in for the next round that we buy from them. Now, if you cannot get that regular supply, you're never going to get that kind of deal with you're never going to get that kind of deal with something like a UK supermarket group. And that takes you back to one of the things that kind of as Patricia was pointing out just there as she was talking about how many individual sole traders couldn't make this because they've got to run their business today. And that takes me into kind of, I think one of the crucial things here is how does capital aggregate into the sector? And I think that is the biggest challenge of all. It's a case of, there are 9 billion people on the planet, there's going to be 9.5 to 10 billion people on the planet within the next 20 years. And their food needs, are they going to be met by 250 million African smallholders? And the reality is they're probably not. In other words, you've got to think, how do you actually organize them into a way that capital flows in to however they are best organized?
Looking at expectedly is how do we stop the security challenges we have, so that people can return to the farms, so that outputs can come back to at least 50% before it gets back to full 100%. And we also need to begin to look at how to really get our youths attracted to agriculture, because if the average age of a farmer here in Nigeria is about 60 years, it means in a couple of years down the line, we'll even have more shortage of food, since the youth will not be interested in agriculture. They don't consider it something they need to get into. Yes, there's that tech part of agric, but tech alone doesn't drive agriculture. You really need to get the human structure, the physical presence there. All these activities are human driven. So for now, my take would be, if the 80% of the smallholder farmers that produce most of the foods consumed in Nigeria and across West Africa and Africa at large are not safe to do their farming because of security issues, then we really cannot start to talk about fair trade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard. Very insightful contribution. Very clear. We have a situation where the population is growing and the capacity is reducing. And not only that, we also have a situation where we have shortage of professionals or people with interest in the sector. So the way forward here is simple. We just need to get more people's interests in the project, get going. Government should be of more support because these are the realities we are facing. Quickly moving on to Mr. Kwame. Mr. Kwame, due to the volatile global market, does fair trade really work for every region or more in some regions than others?
So in short, I would say yes, fair trade does not only relate to a particular region, but it's how we position ourselves as West African. How do we make sure that we comply with the standard that is required of the market? Because mind you, what we are talking about here is not a market for Nigeria or a market for Africa or a market for Burkina Faso or Togo. We are looking at international markets. People who are not of the same culture with us. So we need to do what? Try to learn from the principles, play by the rules. Then we can all be talking about being members of that organization and benefiting from that organization. By then we can be talking about, okay, we are also, we are not all left out, but it's a playing field for all of us.
I'll move on to Mr. Bolaji Olatoye. High cost of production and lack of infrastructure for value addition have been a major challenge for SMEs from Nigeria and other emerging markets in obtaining fair trade. What is the possible solution for these barriers? Include blockchain technology.
We looked at certain situations and we were like, where could we extract value, or where could we pinpoint where there's value that can be attributed to the producer? And then this is where blockchain technology comes into play. So it is very possible that through the use of technology, you can attribute, ownership along the whole value chain of, the supply chain of any produce. We used the example at the time of like coffee beans, and then the way that technology works in that sense is anywhere that this raw material goes on its life cycle, wherever, if it is tracked correctly using blockchain and smart contracts, which are technical terms, no matter where that produce goes or no matter where it ends up, then almost like a royalty can be applied and go back to the original producer. So we have now examples of there's coffee, but imagine if it was things like, say, cotton or any kind of like raw material that will end up somewhere in the value chain. That value can be attributed right all the way back to the owner.